Hi everyone, so today I'm going to be explaining how to create a class in C++ using a header and CPP file, as well as just some of the basics about creating a default constructor, as well as a parameterized constructor, as well as getter and setter functions for your class. So on this page, we are currently in the header file, which is where you're going to start creating your class. At the top, this has the main function for our program. This is the header file. We're going to start creating your class and declare all your functions, and here's where you're going to expand on each of your functions. So within the header file, this pragma once at the top basically just ensures that the header file is only included once in the program to prevent any errors from occurring. This include IOStream just allows us to use the IOStream library and allows for inputs and outputs, and using namespace std avoids us having to use the scope operator and std throughout the program every time we need to call something from the standard namespace. So continuing on, here we just start creating the class. Class student, in this case, you just name the class whatever it is that you want your class to be about. Make sure the name is relevant to the information that it's going to contain, and make sure that the name of your class matches the name of your header file as well as the name of your CPP file. Remember that when you put the brackets around your class, the ending bracket should have a semicolon after it. Otherwise, you will get an error when you try to compile your code. So classes by nature are private, and in this section, we're declaring all the variables in a private manner. You do have to make sure that you are declaring the type of the variable as you go, or you will once again get an error as when you try to compile your program. In this case, we're going to store the student's name, which is a string, the student's age, which is an integer, their ID, which is an integer, their major, which is a string, and their GPA, which is going to be a double. Then in public, you want to put all of the different functions that you want your user to be able to access about the class. So here we have the definition. So here we've defined our basic constructor, our default constructor, and then here we have our parameterized constructor that will allow a user to pass in values for the name, age, ID, major, and GPA. You'll notice here that I used the variable my name instead of name and my age and my ID, and then I switched to using major and GPA, which match these here, and I'll explain why I did that later. It's to show you two different concepts as well. So here, these are just the declarations of all the getter functions, which typically you just label get and then whatever it is the variable that you're trying to get or return. Since these are private variables, a user can't access them with just trying to use like a dot. So in order to access them, they need to be able to use a getter function. And you also have to use the return type of that function. So for getters, you want to return whatever the name is, so you want to return a string. For get age, you want to return what the age is, so you want to return an int. And then down here, setters, once again, since these are private variables, setters allow the user to set a new value for certain variables. In this case, name, age, ID, major, GPA, but since you're not returning anything, we use the return type void. So now you've set up your class, you've declared all of your different functions and variables within the header file. And so now we move over to the CPP file where we start to really get into the definitions, get further into like the actual functionality of each of these things that you've defined. So within the CPP file, we use include student.h, so we make sure to transfer everything over from the header file into the CPP file so it has access to all of this. So first we're going to talk about our constructors. So here you call student because this lets the computer know that this function was declared in the student header file. And then you use your scope resolution operator and student. So this is your default constructor. So I just put here, every time we call this default constructor, it's going to print, this is the default constructor, just so we can make sure that the program is running correctly. And then I set default values for each of these things. So name, we set equal to default, age 0, ID 4 zeros, major, default, and GPA 0. So every time that the user calls the default constructor, which is going to be without any parameters, it will create a student with all of these characteristics. So next we have the parameterized constructor. Once again, this uses student to let the computer know where the function was originally declared, and then student and all the parameters that were in the original declaration. So now we're expanding on that and defining what will happen when you call this. So for my name, my age, and my ID, the name of the input variable is different from the actual name of the variable in the student class. So we can just set name, which is in the student class, equal to my name, which is the passed in parameter. And similar for age and ID. It's a little different if you decide instead to use the same name for the parameter as you do for the variable in your class. If you want to do this, then you just use the keyword this and then a little arrow to major. So this lets you know that you're defining the major variable within the class and you're setting it equal to major, the parameter that's being passed in. Same for GPA. You use the keyword this with the arrow to GPA. This lets you know that you want to set the student class GPA to be equal to the parameter, the GPA passed in the parameter. So this gives you both your default constructor and your parameterized constructor. So now we're going to move on to the getters section. Here we have you have to make sure you declare your return type. So for get name, it's going to be a string. Then once again, you have to let the computer know where you originally declared this function. You declared it in the student class. So you put student, the scope resolution operator, and then get name, the name of the function you're now defining. And all you want to do with a getter is just simply return the variable. So here we have return name, and you follow this same pattern for all of the rest of the variables. So for age, you want to return an int. Here, once again, we declared it in the student class, scope resolution operator, get age, just as we had in the header file. And then all you want to do is return age. It's the exact same thing for get ID, get major, and get GPA. And that's how a getter works. It just really allows the user to access the private data member by calling this get name function instead of having direct access to it. And next we have the setters. Once again, the setters basically allow the user to change or modify the variables with the program within the class, even though the variables are private. And they do that by calling the set whatever variable they're trying to modify. So for set name, well, for all the setter functions, the return type is going to be void because you're not actually returning anything. You're just changing a variable within the class. And then once again, student lets you know where you originally declared this function, and then set name, the name of the function, and the input. So they're going to input a parameter of new name. That's also going to be a string in this case. And all you are going to do is set name, the name of the student in the class, equal to the new name passed in by the user. And the same thing is going to go for set age. Once again, you're not returning anything. So return type void, you declared it in student. And then set age, the parameter that you want them to pass in is int new age, whatever new age they're trying to set. And then you're going to set the age of the student to be equal to the new age that the user passed in. And the same thing applies for set ID, set major, and set GPA. So that basically describes how to use the default constructor, parameterized constructor, getters, and setters in classes in C++. And so this is going to be our main function here. So all we did was include student.h. We don't have to include any of the things like IOStream or standard namespace because those are already included in the top of student.h. So then we go into the main function, and this is just going to allow you to see that our class is working properly. So first we are right here, this calls the default constructor. So student, you're declaring the type of the object. You're creating a student object using your class, and then student1, and you're passing in no parameters. So this is going to call the default constructor, and it should print this is the default constructor. And then this is going to allow you to see all of the different variables that are supposed to be automatically created by the default constructor. So student1 name, and then we're using student1.getName. Since it's private, we have to call the getter function in order to see what the name is, but this should return default, age should return 0, ID should return 0, 0, 0, 0, major should return default, and GPA should also be 0. So when all of this prints, those should be the values because we are calling this default constructor. Then right here, we're just going to demonstrate how the setters work. So we're calling once again student1, which is the name we've given to this student, and we're going to use set name in order to change the name of student1 to Abby, the parameter we've passed in here. And then we're going to see out student1 new name and then student1.getName. So now this setter should change the name variable for student1 to be Abby. So now student1.getName should return Abby instead of default. And then this demonstrates basically the same idea, but instead with the parameterized constructor, once again, you're creating a student object. You're calling it student2. And then these are all the parameters you're passing in. You're saying that the name of the student is John, the age is 18, ID is 1, 2, 3, 4, major is biology, and GPA is 3.85. Once again here, this just uses all the getter functions to retrieve the private variables, and the cout statements just print those out to make sure that this parameterized constructor is working as it should. So student2.name or student2 name, student2.getName should print student2 name : John. And similar thing for age, it should be student2 age : 18, student2 ID : 1, 2, 3, 4, student2 major : biology, student2 GPA : 3.85. And then once again, this is showing how the setters work with the parameterized constructor. So you're once again calling to student2, which is the student object you created using the parameterized constructor, and you're doing set major to psychology. So this should change the major for student2 to psychology. And here, student2 new major, now you're calling student2 get major, and it should return psychology and print student2 new major : psychology. Instead of formally before you use the setter, student2.getMajor would have returned biology. So now we're just going to run the program to make sure that everything is working as it should. And we can see here, this is the default constructor. That happened when we called this default constructor. Now it's correctly printing that student1 name based on default constructor is default, age is 0, ID is 0, major is default, and GPA is 0. Here we change the name using the setName function, and then print out student1 new name is Abby. So that worked all correctly. And then we continue on here. This calls and creates a new object, a new student object, student2, using the parameterized constructor, and then this prints out all the information down here. Once again, name is correctly returned as John, age 18, ID 1, 2, 3, 4, major biology, and GPA 3.85. Then again, we use the setter function to change the major and then see out this new changed major, student to new major, psychology. So everything is working as it should, and this is just a good basic introduction to how to create a class in C++ using a header and CPP file, as well as how to create a default constructor, a parameterized constructor, as well as getter and setter functions for all of your private variables. Thanks for watching. Bye.